They say trust is like a mirror. Once it's broken, you can never look at it the same way again. My name is Maya, and I learned this lesson in the most devastating way possible, when the person I trusted most in the world didn't just break my trust. She literally stole my entire life. This is the story of how my best friend destroyed everything I'd worked for, and how I fought to get my identity back from someone who knew all my secrets. It started so innocently. I was 24, fresh out of college, and working my first real job at a digital marketing agency in Chicago. I'd moved there from small-town Ohio, knowing absolutely no one, carrying nothing but ambition and a suitcase full of dreams. The city felt overwhelming and lonely those first few months. I'd spend evenings in my tiny studio apartment, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake leaving everything familiar behind. Then I met Chloe. She was sitting alone at the coffee shop across from my office building, crying quietly over what looked like rejection letters spread across her table. Something about her vulnerability drew me in. Maybe it was because I recognized the look of someone trying to make it in a big city, with nothing but hope and determination. I bought her a coffee and asked if she was okay. "Job hunting," she said with a watery smile. "It's been 3 months since I graduated, and I'm starting to think I'll never find anything." We talked for 2 hours that day. Chloe had moved to Chicago from Denver, also chasing dreams, also feeling overwhelmed by the city's indifference. She'd studied graphic design and was looking for entry-level positions, but the competition was fierce. By the time we parted ways, we'd exchanged numbers and made plans to meet for dinner that weekend. Looking back now, I can see how calculated it all was. How perfectly she positioned herself as the struggling, vulnerable friend who needed my help. But at the time it felt like fate. Finally, someone who understood what I was going through. Someone who could share the adventure of building a new life in an unfamiliar place. Our friendship developed quickly. Within a month we were talking every day, meeting for coffee or drinks several times a week, spending weekends exploring the city together. Chloe was everything I wasn't. Effortlessly stylish, confident in social situations, the type of person who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. I was more reserved, more analytical, but she seemed to genuinely value my perspective and advice. I helped her with everything. When she finally landed a job at a small design firm, I helped her negotiate her salary. When she couldn't afford her security deposit, I loaned her money. When she needed professional references, I connected her with contacts from my network. I shared my strategies for networking, my favorite resources for professional development, even my personal approach to work-life balance. "You're like the big sister I never had," she told me one evening as we sat on her couch, sharing a bottle of wine and planning our next career moves. "I don't know what I would have done without you this year." I felt the same way about her. For the first time since moving to Chicago, I felt like I had real family there. Someone who truly cared about my success and happiness. We celebrated each other's wins and supported each other through setbacks. When I got promoted to senior account coordinator after 18 months, Chloe threw me a surprise party. When she landed a freelance project with a major retailer, I took her out for the most expensive dinner we could afford. We knew everything about each other. I told her about my childhood, my insecurities, my dreams for the future. She knew my social security number, because I'd had her help me organize my tax documents when I was overwhelmed during my first year of filing as an independent adult. She knew my mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, all the little details that seem harmless to share with someone I trusted completely. I even told her about Marcus. Marcus was my college boyfriend, the one who got away. We dated for 2 years before he transferred to a university across the country to pursue a specialized program in environmental engineering. The long-distance thing didn't work out, but we'd maintained a friendship of sorts over social media. He'd moved to San Francisco after graduation and was working for a clean energy startup. Every few months, we'd exchange messages catching up on our lives, and I harbored secret hopes that maybe someday our paths would cross again romantically. "You should reach out to him," Chloe encouraged me. "What's the worst that could happen?" But I was scared. Scared of rejection. Scared of ruining the friendly dynamic we'd maintained. Scared of looking desperate. So I kept putting it off, telling myself I'd message him when I had something more impressive to report about my career, when I felt more confident about my life trajectory. Chloe was endlessly patient with my neuroses about Marcus. She'd listen to me analyze his social media posts, help me craft casual messages that I'd ultimately never send, and reassure me that any guy would be lucky to be with me. She was the best friend I'd ever had, the sister I'd always wanted, the person I thought would be in my life forever. The first sign that something was wrong came about 2 years into our friendship. I was at work when my bank called to verify some unusual activity on my account. Someone had attempted to open a credit card using my information, they said. The application had been flagged because the address didn't match my current address. They'd used my old college dorm address. It's probably just identity theft, the bank representative assured me. It happens more often than you'd think. We'll freeze your accounts temporarily and send you new cards. In the meantime, you should check your credit report and consider placing a fraud alert. I was shaken but not suspicious of anyone in particular. Identity theft was common, and I figured my information had probably been compromised in some data breach I'd never heard about. I spent the evening on the phone with credit reporting agencies, setting up fraud alerts and reviewing my credit history. Everything looked normal except for that one attempted credit card application. A few weeks later, weird things started happening with my social media accounts. I'd get notifications that someone had tried to log into my Instagram from an unfamiliar device. My Facebook password was reset without my authorization. My LinkedIn profile was updated with information I hadn't added. Each incident seemed minor in isolation, easily explained by hackers or technical glitches. But then I got a call from Marcus. "Hey Maya," he said, and my heart immediately started racing because we rarely talked on the phone. "I wanted to thank you for reaching out. It was really good to hear from you after all this time." Reaching out? I was confused. What do you mean? There was a pause. The messages you sent last week? About wanting to reconnect and maybe meet up when I'm in Chicago next month for work. I hadn't sent any messages to Marcus. I'd been thinking about it, talking to Chloe about it, but I definitely hadn't actually done it. "Marcus, I think there might be some mistake. I didn't send you any messages." Another pause, longer this time. "That's weird. They definitely came from your Instagram account." We had a whole conversation about meeting up for dinner. My blood ran cold. Someone had been messaging Marcus pretending to be me. But who would do that? Who even knew about my feelings for Marcus? About my hesitation to reach out to him? The answer hit me like a physical blow. "Chloe, can you send me screenshots of those messages?" I asked Marcus, my voice probably sounding strange. "Sure, but Maya, are you okay? This is really bizarre." When the screenshots arrived, I stared at them in disbelief. They were sent from my Instagram account, but the writing style was subtly different from mine. Too many exclamation points, slightly more aggressive flirtation than I would have used. And they mentioned details about my current life that were accurate but described in ways I never would have phrased them. I called Instagram immediately and learned that someone had been accessing my account from multiple devices over the past several weeks. The customer service representative helped me secure my account and review the login history. Most of the unauthorized access had occurred during work hours, when I was at the office and wouldn't have noticed the login notifications on my phone. But I needed to be sure. I needed to confirm what my gut was already telling me before I accused my best friend of violating my privacy and impersonating me online. I set a trap. The next day I told Chloe a lie. I said I'd finally worked up the courage to message Marcus myself, and that we were planning to meet for dinner when he came to Chicago the following week. I watched her face carefully as I said it, looking for any sign of recognition or guilt. "That's amazing," she said, her enthusiasm seeming genuine. "I'm so proud of you for finally making a move. Where are you planning to take him?" I made up details about a restaurant reservation, about how nervous I was, about how I hoped we might be able to rebuild something romantic. Chloe was supportive and encouraging, asking all the right questions, offering to help me pick out an outfit for the date. That evening I checked my Instagram messages. Sure enough, there was a new conversation with Marcus from my account, sent while I was having dinner with Chloe. The imposter had messaged him about changing our dinner location, suggesting the exact restaurant I'd mentioned to Chloe earlier that day. The realization that my best friend had been systematically violating my privacy and impersonating me online hit me like a truck. But it was just the beginning. Over the next few days, as I dug deeper with the help of a cybersecurity specialist my company used, We uncovered the full scope of what Chloe had been doing. She hadn't just been accessing my social media accounts. She'd been systematically stealing my identity for months. She'd applied for credit cards in my name, using information I'd shared with her during our friendship. She'd created fake dating profiles using my photos and personal details. She'd even applied for jobs using my resume and work samples, just changing the contact information to her own. The credit card applications explained the call I'd received from my bank months earlier. The dating profiles explained why I'd been getting strange messages from men I'd never communicated with. The job applications were the most insidious. She'd been essentially stealing my professional identity, using my work and achievements to advance her own career. But the Marcus situation was what hurt the most. She'd been having an ongoing conversation with him for weeks, pretending to be me, building a relationship based on my feelings and her manipulation. When I read through all the messages, I could see how skillfully she'd been playing both sides, encouraging me to reach out to him while simultaneously reaching out herself using my identity. Confronting her was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. I invited her to coffee at our usual place, the same coffee shop where we'd first met 2 years earlier. She arrived in a great mood, chattering about a new project at work and asking about my plans for the weekend. Looking at her, I couldn't reconcile the friend I thought I knew with the person who had been systematically betraying me for months. "Chloe," I said, interrupting her story about a difficult client, "I know what you've been doing." The change in her expression was immediate and telling. The bright, friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by something calculating and cold. For a moment, she tried to maintain innocence. "What are you talking about? I know you've been accessing my accounts. I know you've been applying for credit cards in my name. I know you've been messaging Marcus pretending to be me." The silence stretched between us for what felt like forever. Then, instead of shame or apology, I saw something that shocked me even more: defiance. "You were never going to message him yourself," she said finally. "You've been talking about it for months, but you were too scared to actually do anything. I was helping you." "Helping me? You were stealing my identity. I was pushing you to take action. You're so passive, Maya. You let opportunities slip by because you're afraid of everything. I was trying to show you what you could have if you just went after it." The gaslighting was breathtaking. She was actually trying to frame identity theft and impersonation as a favor she'd been doing for me. But what came next was even worse. "Besides," she continued, "it's not like you were using your identity to its full potential. You're wasting the opportunities you have. You have this great job, this great life, and you spend most of your time worried about things that don't matter. Someone should be making the most of the identity you're squandering." I stared at her in disbelief. This wasn't the friend I thought I knew. This was someone who genuinely believed she had a right to my life, my opportunities, my very identity because she thought she could use them better than I could. "You need to stop," I said firmly. "You need to delete any accounts you've created using my information, cancel any applications you've made in my name, and stay out of my life completely." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. Prove that I did any of this. You gave me access to your accounts, Maya. You shared your personal information with me willingly. You think anyone's going to believe that I somehow forced you to tell me your social security number?" She was right, and we both knew it. I had shared information with her willingly, trusting her as a friend. I'd let her use my laptop, had her help me with various online tasks. Proving that she'd used that access and information maliciously would be nearly impossible. But I had to try. The next few months were a nightmare of bureaucracy and legal complications. I filed police reports, but the officers seemed skeptical about the likelihood of prosecution. Identity theft cases involving friends or family members were notoriously difficult to prove, they explained. I hired a lawyer, but she warned me that the case would be expensive and challenging, with no guarantee of success. Meanwhile, the damage Chloe had done continued to unfold. Credit cards I'd never applied for appeared on my credit report. Dating apps notified me of activity on accounts I'd never created. Most devastating of all, I discovered that she'd been interviewing for jobs using my portfolio and experience, representing herself as me to potential employers. The discovery came when a recruiter called me about a position I'd never applied for. "Ms. Johnson," the woman said, "I wanted to follow up on our interview last week. We were very impressed with your presentation, and we'd like to make you an offer. I think there's been some mistake, I said. I never interviewed with your company. The confusion that followed led to a conversation with the recruiter's supervisor, then with their HR department. When they described the woman who had interviewed as me, the description matched Chloe perfectly. She'd not only stolen my identity, she'd been actively using it to try to steal my career opportunities. That's when I realized the true scope of what she'd done. This wasn't just random identity theft or a few unauthorized social media posts. This was a systematic attempt to replace me in my own life. She'd been studying me for 2 years, learning my mannerisms, my communication style, my professional approach. She'd been preparing to become me. The psychological impact was devastating. I stopped trusting my own judgment about people. I became paranoid about sharing personal information, even with longtime friends and family members. I second-guessed every relationship, wondering who else might be secretly plotting to take advantage of me. Sleep became elusive as I lay awake at night wondering what else Chloe might have done that I hadn't discovered yet. My work performance suffered as I spent more and more time dealing with the aftermath of her betrayal. I had to place fraud alerts on my credit, change passwords on dozens of accounts, and explain to various companies and institutions why someone else had been impersonating me. The constant stress and anxiety began affecting my health. I lost weight, developed frequent headaches, and found myself crying at random moments throughout the day. The worst part was the isolation. I couldn't talk to mutual friends about what was happening, because I wasn't sure who else Chloe might have manipulated, or what stories she might have told about me. I was afraid that people would think I was paranoid or unstable if I explained that my best friend had been systematically stealing my identity. The whole situation sounded crazy even to me, and I was living through it. My family back in Ohio tried to be supportive, but they didn't really understand the complexity of what I was dealing with. Just change your passwords and move on, my dad suggested during one of our phone calls. Don't let some crazy girl ruin your life. But it wasn't that simple. Chloe hadn't just accessed my accounts. She'd infiltrated my entire existence. She knew my professional goals, my personal insecurities, my romantic history, my family dynamics. She'd spent 2 years positioning herself to be able to step into my life seamlessly, and now she was actively trying to do exactly that. The breakthrough came 6 months after our confrontation in the coffee shop. I was working late at the office when I got a call from Marcus. "Maya," he said, and his voice sounded strange. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." My heart sank. I'd been dreading this conversation since discovering Chloe's impersonation, but I'd hoped maybe he'd never find out about it. "The woman I met in Chicago last month," he continued. "Was that really you?" "What do you mean?" "I came to Chicago for work, like we'd been planning in our messages. I met someone for dinner who said she was you, but something felt off the entire time. She looked different from your photos, acted differently than I remembered you, and knew details about my life that I was sure I'd never shared with you." My worst fears were being realized. Chloe hadn't just been messaging Marcus pretending to be me. She'd actually met him in person, representing herself as me. "Marcus," I said carefully, "I need to tell you something complicated, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you react." I explained everything. The identity theft, the fake accounts, the job applications, the systematic invasion of my privacy. I told him about discovering the messages she'd sent pretending to be me, and about my suspicion that she'd now taken the impersonation into the real world. "Oh my God," he said when I finished. "Maya, this is insane. This woman Chloe, she's been pretending to be you for months. She knew things about our college relationship that she could only have known if she'd read through years of our old messages. And she was trying to, what? Replace you in my life." Hearing him say it out loud made the situation feel even more surreal and violating. Chloe hadn't just stolen my identity for financial gain or random mischief. She'd been trying to steal my relationships, my romantic possibilities, my entire social existence. "I thought something was wrong when I met her," Marcus continued. "She looked enough like your photos that I didn't question it initially, but her personality was completely different. More aggressive, more performative, I guess. And she kept pushing for physical intimacy in a way that didn't seem like you at all. The thought of Chloe trying to sleep with Marcus while pretending to be me made me physically ill. The violation felt complete and absolute. She hadn't just stolen my financial identity or my professional opportunities. She tried to steal my romantic life, my most intimate connections. That conversation with Marcus was a turning point. Instead of feeling helpless and victimized, I got angry. Really truly angry in a way that burned away the depression and anxiety I'd been carrying for months. Chloe had crossed every possible line and I was done being passive about it. I hired a private investigator. It sounds dramatic, but my lawyer had recommended it as a way to gather evidence for potential criminal charges. The PI was a middle-aged woman named Detective Sarah Chun, who specialized in identity theft and fraud cases. She was thorough, professional, and refreshingly direct about the challenges we'd face in building a case. The problem with friend-based identity theft, she explained during our first meeting, is that the perpetrator usually has legitimate access to a lot of the victim's information. Your friend didn't break into your house or hack your computer. You gave her access willingly as part of your friendship. That makes it much harder to prove criminal intent. But Detective Chun was determined, and over the next several weeks, she uncovered evidence that even I hadn't suspected. Chloe had been more systematic and more ambitious than I'd realized. She'd created not just fake dating profiles and fraudulent credit applications, but an entire alternate version of my life. She'd been networking in my name, attending professional events and introducing herself as me to people in my industry. She created social media profiles for hobbies I'd mentioned enjoying, but had never actually pursued seriously. She'd even been volunteering at organizations I'd expressed interest in, building a public presence as me that was more active and accomplished than my actual life. She's been living as you part-time for over a year, Detective Chun told me as she showed me the evidence she'd gathered. And from what I can see, she's been preparing to make the transition full-time. The most chilling discovery was a notebook Detective Chun found when she searched Chloe's apartment with a warrant. It was filled with detailed observations about my life, my habits, my speech patterns, my relationships. She'd been studying me like a role she was preparing to play, noting everything from my favorite coffee order to the way I styled my hair to the specific phrases I used when I was nervous or excited. "Look at this," Detective Chun said, showing me a page from the notebook. "She's been practicing your signature. And here's a list of your childhood memories that she's been memorizing, probably so she could pass for you in conversations with people who've known you for a long time." Reading those pages felt like looking at my own autopsy report. Chloe had dissected my personality, my history, my identity, and reconstructed it all as something she could put on like a costume. The friendship I'd treasured, the connection I'd thought was genuine, had been nothing more than research for her. Every conversation we'd had, every secret I'd shared, every vulnerable moment I'd opened up to her. It had all been data collection for her project of becoming me. The legal case moved slowly, but Detective Chen's evidence was compelling. Chloe was eventually charged with identity theft, fraud, and computer crimes. The trial was a media circus in miniature, a cautionary tale about modern friendship and digital betrayal that local news outlets couldn't resist covering. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to prosecutors detail the extent of Chloe's deception, I felt a strange mix of vindication and grief. I was vindicated because everyone could finally see that I wasn't paranoid or unstable. I'd been the victim of an elaborate long-term fraud. But I also grieved for the friendship I'd thought we had, for the trust I'd lost not just in Chloe but in my own ability to judge people's character. Chloe's defense attorney tried to paint her as a troubled young woman who'd gotten carried away with admiration for her friend. They argued that she'd never intended real harm, that she'd been motivated by insecurity, and a desire to be more like someone she admired. The prosecution countered with evidence of premeditation and sophistication that suggested someone who'd been planning to completely replace me in my own life. When Chloe took the stand in her own defense, she looked directly at me for the first time since our confrontation in the coffee shop. "I never meant to hurt Maya," she said, and her voice carried the same warmth and sincerity that had made me trust her in the first place. I admired her so much, and I guess I got confused about where admiration ended and obsession began. "I made terrible choices and I'm sorry for the pain I've caused." It was a carefully crafted apology, designed to make her seem sympathetic rather than predatory. But I could see through it now. I'd learned to recognize the performance, the way she could modulate her voice and expression to create whatever emotional response she wanted from her audience. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison and ordered her to pay restitution for the financial damage she'd caused. Felt like justice, but it also felt hollow. Prison time couldn't undo the psychological damage, couldn't restore the sense of safety and trust that had been shattered, couldn't give me back the 2 years of friendship that had been built on lies. Rebuilding my life after Chloe's betrayal was harder than starting over in a new city had been. At least when I'd moved to Chicago, I'd been starting with a clean slate. Now I was starting with a contaminated slate, having to undo the damage she'd done while also trying to move forward. I spent months working with credit agencies to clean up my credit report, with social media companies to secure my accounts, with professional networks to clarify my actual work history and achievements. I had to have uncomfortable conversations with Marcus, explaining the full extent of what had happened and why someone had been impersonating me in their communications. "I feel like I need to get to know you all over again," he said during one of our video calls. "The person I was messaging with for all those months wasn't really you, but she knew so much about you that sometimes it felt like talking to you. It's confusing." It was confusing for me too. In some ways, Chloe had been living a version of my life that was more confident and outgoing than my actual personality. The Maya she performed for Marcus was bolder, more direct about her feelings, more willing to take romantic risks. Part of me wondered if that version of myself might have been better, more successful, more attractive. But therapy helped me work through those complicated feelings. Dr. Rebecca Martinez specialized in trauma recovery and helped me understand that questioning myself was a normal response to this kind of betrayal. "What Chloe did to you is a form of psychological assault," she explained. "She didn't just steal your financial information or your social media accounts. She studied your personality, your vulnerabilities, your dreams, and then used all of that against you. It's natural that you're questioning your own judgment and self-worth." Through therapy, I began to understand that Chloe's ability to manipulate me didn't reflect any failing on my part. Sociopaths and narcissists are skilled at identifying and exploiting people's trust and kindness. The qualities that made me vulnerable to her, my openness, my willingness to help others, my desire for genuine connection, weren't character flaws. They were actually strengths that she'd perverted for her own purposes. The healing process was slow and nonlinear. Some days I felt strong and confident, focused on building my new life. Other days I felt fragile and suspicious, afraid to trust anyone with personal information or vulnerable feelings. I had to learn new ways of forming friendships, setting boundaries that protected me without making me completely closed off to genuine connections. Work became my anchor during this period. My colleagues and supervisors were incredibly supportive when I explained what I was dealing with. They helped me document my actual work history and achievements, provided references to counteract any confusion Chloe's impersonation might have caused in our industry, and gave me the flexibility I needed to handle legal proceedings and therapy appointments. About a year after Chloe's conviction, I got an unexpected message from Marcus. He was coming to Chicago again for work and wondered if I'd like to meet for coffee. As ourselves this time, with no pretense or impersonation involved. I was nervous about seeing him again. The relationship we'd been building through Chloe's fake messages felt complicated and tainted. How do you start fresh with someone when a third party has been manipulating your communications for months? But I was also curious about who he really was, separate from Chloe's performance of our relationship. We met at a quiet cafe in Lincoln Park, and I was struck immediately by how different the dynamic felt from what I'd expected based on the messages Chloe had sent as me. Marcus was gentler, more introspective than the aggressive confidence Chloe had been responding to. The real conversation between us was quieter, more thoughtful, built on genuine curiosity rather than the performative flirtation she'd been engaging in. "I kept wondering why your personality seemed so different in person," he told me as we walked along the lake after coffee. "The woman I met for dinner that night was charming, but she felt like she was trying too hard, like she was performing a version of you, rather than actually being you." "What am I like?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perception of my authentic self. "You're more thoughtful," he said. "More careful with your words. You listen more than you talk, and when you do talk, it feels like you really mean what you're saying. The woman I met before was entertaining, but you're actually interesting." We started dating slowly, carefully, building something real based on who we actually were rather than who Chloe had pretended I was. It was healing in unexpected ways, Having someone who'd experienced Chloe's manipulation firsthand and could understand the complexity of what I'd been through. But the relationship also highlighted how much the betrayal had changed me. I was more guarded now, more careful about sharing personal information, more alert to signs that someone might not be who they seemed. Marcus was patient with my trust issues, but I could see how exhausting it must have been to love someone who'd been so thoroughly betrayed by friendship. 2 years after Chloe's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. My first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was vintage Chloe. Beautifully written, emotionally manipulative, designed to make me feel sorry for her while minimizing her responsibility for what she'd done. She wrote about how lonely she was, how much she missed our friendship, how she'd never intended things to go as far as they had. She claimed that her actions had been motivated by admiration and a desire to help me reach my potential. But buried in the self-serving explanations and requests for forgiveness was something that chilled me to the bone. She wrote about other friendships she'd had over the years, other people who'd inspired her, other situations where she'd helped friends who weren't living up to their potential. The implication was clear. I wasn't her first victim. I shared the letter with Detective Chun, who'd stayed in touch throughout the legal proceedings. She wasn't surprised. Predators like Chloe rarely stop with one victim, she explained. Identity theft, especially the psychological kind she practiced on you, is usually part of a pattern. She probably targeted you because you fit a specific profile: successful, trusting, somewhat isolated from family support systems. The realization that I'd been selected rather than randomly victimized was somehow both comforting and disturbing. Comforting because it confirmed that nothing I'd done had caused or deserved the betrayal. Disturbing because it meant Chloe's friendship had been fake from the very first day we met. Do you think she ever cared about me at all? I asked Dr. Martinez during one of our sessions. I think she cared about what you could provide for her, she replied. Your trust, your information, your life circumstances, your opportunities. But did she care about you as a person, independent of what you could give her? Based on everything you've told me about her behavior, I don't think she was capable of that kind of caring. It was a hard truth to accept, but it was also liberating. For months, I'd been torturing myself wondering if I'd somehow misunderstood Chloe's motivations, if there was some way to interpret her actions as misguided love rather than calculated exploitation. Understanding that she'd never actually been my friend, that the entire relationship had been a lie designed to facilitate her eventual theft of my identity, helped me stop blaming myself for trusting her. The legal resolution brought some closure, but the real healing happened in smaller, quieter moments. The first time I shared personal information with a new friend without feeling panic. The first time I posted on social media without immediately checking to see if someone was impersonating me. The first time I went on a date without wondering if the person across from me was studying my mannerisms for future use. I changed careers after everything that happened, leaving marketing to become a victim advocate specializing in identity theft and fraud. It felt like a way to transform my trauma into something useful, to help other people navigate the complex aftermath of betrayal and deception. The work is challenging but meaningful, and I've discovered that helping other victims rebuild their lives has been crucial to my own healing process. My relationship with Marcus evolved slowly but genuinely. We took our time getting to know each other without the artificial intimacy that Chloe's impersonation had created. When he proposed last year, he joked that he was sure he was proposing to the real me this time, but underneath the humor was an acknowledgement of how bizarre our origin story really was. I fell in love with who you actually are, he told me. Not the performance someone else gave pretending to be you. Planning our wedding has brought up unexpected emotions about family and friendship. I'm hypervigilant about the guest list, carefully vetting everyone who'll have access to our personal information and celebration. Feels paranoid sometimes, but it also feels necessary. I've learned that trust isn't something you give freely. It's something you extend carefully to people who've proven they deserve it. The experience with Chloe taught me that there are people in the world who see other people's lives as resources to be exploited, rather than relationships to be cherished. She looked at my successes, my opportunities, my connections, and decided she wanted them for herself. The friendship was never real. It was just the method she used to get close enough to take what she wanted. But it also taught me about resilience I didn't know I possessed. I survived having my entire identity stolen by someone I loved and trusted. I rebuilt my life from scratch, stronger and more aware than before. I learned to trust my instincts about people, to value authenticity over charm, to protect my energy and information more carefully. Sometimes people ask me if I miss Chloe, if I miss the friendship we had. The honest answer is that I miss what I thought we had. I miss believing that someone cared about me that deeply, supported me that unconditionally, understood me that completely. But I don't miss Chloe herself because the person I thought was my best friend never actually existed. She was just a character Chloe played to gain access to my life. The real tragedy isn't that I lost a friend. It's that I never had one in the first place. Today, as I write our wedding invitations and plan a celebration with people who genuinely love and support me, I'm grateful for the painful lesson Chloe taught me about the difference between authentic connection and skilled manipulation. My social circle is smaller now, but it's real. My relationships are deeper because they're built on genuine mutual care, rather than what I can provide for someone else. I still think about her sometimes, wondering what drove her to live such an elaborate lie, wondering if she ever felt genuine affection for me or if it was all calculated performance. But mostly, I focus on the life I've built since she was removed from it. A life that's actually mine, lived by my choices, shared with people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide them. The wedding planning process has been therapeutic in ways I didn't expect. Every decision Marcus and I make together reinforces that this is our authentic life, our genuine choices, our real relationship. When we taste test cakes or choose flowers or write our vows, I'm acutely aware that no one is studying my preferences to use against me later. The intimacy feels safe because it's mutual and honest. I've also reconnected with some old friends from college and my hometown, relationships that had faded when I moved to Chicago, and became so focused on building new connections. There's something healing about spending time with people who knew me before Chloe, who remember my authentic personality, and can remind me of who I was before I started questioning everything about myself. My work with identity theft victims has shown me that my experience, while extreme, isn't entirely unique. I've worked with clients whose romantic partners stole their identities, whose family members opened credit accounts in their names, whose roommates used their information to commit fraud. The common thread in all these cases is the violation of intimate trust, the way people use access granted through love or friendship to cause devastating harm. One client, an elderly man named Robert whose son had been using his social security number to avoid paying child support, told me something that stuck with me. The theft itself was bad enough, but losing faith in my own judgment about people, that was the real damage. I understood exactly what he meant. Chloe didn't just steal my identity. She stole my confidence in my ability to recognize genuine friendship, authentic connection, trustworthy people. Rebuilding that confidence has been harder than fixing my credit score or securing my online accounts. But I have rebuilt it slowly and carefully. I've learned to trust my instincts about people, while also setting protective boundaries. I pay attention to red flags I might have dismissed before: people who ask too many personal questions too quickly, who seem overly interested in my professional contacts or financial situation, who mirror my interests and opinions a little too perfectly. I've also learned to value different qualities in friendships. Where I once was drawn to Chloe's charisma and confidence, I now prioritize consistency and authenticity. I look for people who maintain the same personality across different situations, who have their own clear interests and opinions rather than adapting to match mine, who respect boundaries when I set them. Marcus often says that Chloe's betrayal, awful as it was, might have saved me from something even worse down the line. Imagine if you'd never discovered what she was doing, he points out. Imagine if she'd had access to your life for 5 years, or 10 years, or if you trusted her with even more important things. He's right. As devastating as the discovery was, it could have been much worse. Chloe could have destroyed my career permanently, ruined my relationships with family members, or caused financial damage that would have taken decades to repair. The fact that I caught her when I did, that Marcus recognized something was wrong when he met her in person, probably saved me from even greater harm. The experience has also given me a unique perspective on privacy and digital security that's been valuable in both my personal life and my professional work. I understand now how much personal information we casually share with friends, how easy it is for someone with malicious intent to use that information against us. I've become an advocate for better digital literacy, for teaching people to protect their personal information, even within trusted relationships. I speak at conferences now, sharing my story as a cautionary tale about modern friendship and digital vulnerability. It's always difficult to relive the experience, but I've found that talking about it helps other people recognize potential warning signs in their own relationships. The response from audiences is always intense. Everyone can imagine how devastating it would be to discover that a close friend had been systematically stealing their identity. How do you trust people now? Is the question I get most often after these presentations. Carefully, I always answer. But I do still trust people. I just do it more thoughtfully now. Because that's the thing about surviving betrayal of this magnitude, you have a choice. You can let it make you bitter and closed off, or you can let it make you wiser and more discerning. You can live in fear of being hurt again, or you can live more intentionally, building relationships based on genuine compatibility and mutual respect rather than convenience and shared circumstances. I chose wisdom over bitterness, and while it's been a difficult path, it's led me to a life that feels more authentic than anything I had before. My relationships now are deeper because they're built on a foundation of real trust. My sense of self is stronger because it's not dependent on other people's validation or approval. My boundaries are clearer because I've learned the cost of letting them be too porous. Chloe was released from prison 8 months ago. I know this because Detective Chan keeps me updated on significant developments in the case. She's moved to a different city, changed her name, and started over somewhere else. Part of me wonders if she's found new victims, new friendships to exploit, new identities to steal. But that's not my responsibility anymore. My responsibility is to my own life, my own healing, my own future. Last week, Marcus and I went back to that coffee shop where I first met Chloe. We were in the neighborhood for a wedding venue tour, and I suggested we stop in for old time's sake. Sitting at a table near where I'd first encountered her, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for the innocent person I'd been that day, the one who thought the biggest risk in making new friends was occasional awkwardness or incompatibility. Anger at how thoroughly I'd been deceived and manipulated, but also gratitude for how much I'd learned about myself, about resilience, about the difference between authentic and performed connection. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd never seen through her? Marcus asked as we walked back to the car. Sometimes, I admitted. But then I remember that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. If I hadn't discovered what she was doing, someone else would have. And by then, the damage might have been irreparable. As we drove away from that coffee shop, past the building where I used to work when I first met Chloe, I realized something profound. She'd stolen my identity, but she'd never actually stolen my life. My life was more than my social security number, my credit history, my social media presence, or even my relationships. My life was my choices, my values, my response to adversity, my capacity for growth and healing. And those things, the essential parts of who I am, were always mine, no matter how skillfully she tried to copy them. The mirror of trust may be broken, but I've learned to see myself clearly without needing its reflection. I know who I am now in a way I never did before. Chloe's betrayal forced me to examine every aspect of my identity and decide what was truly mine to keep. The woman who was naive enough to share her social security number with a friend she'd known for 6 months is gone. In her place is someone stronger, wiser, and more authentically herself than ever before. That's the strangest gift Chloe gave me, though I'm sure she never intended it. In trying to steal my identity, she forced me to discover who I really was underneath all the superficial details she'd copied. And that person, the real me, turned out to be someone worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth rebuilding a life around. They say the truth will set you free, and they're right. But sometimes freedom looks different than you expected. Sometimes it looks like starting over, like losing people you thought you could count on, like learning to trust yourself more than you trust others. Sometimes freedom is lonely and difficult, and nothing like the fairy tale endings we're told to expect. But it's still freedom. And for me, that's been worth everything it cost.